I finished the last book in the first three at least, and I was kind of just letting everything simmer for a while, and I kept putting off making this video. So we're gonna do it. It's gonna be, I'm doing the let's talk because it's not quite review, not quite spoiler discussion, but just in general want to chat kind of some of my thoughts about this, and we'll go from there. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Prince of Nothing trilogy by R. Scott Bakker and just kind of my general thoughts now that I have finally finished this. This is one of those series that I've meant to start getting into for a long time. I've heard a lot about, heard a lot of differing opinions on too, but is one that I just was really curious to see how I would feel about, and I'm really glad that I finally got into because I enjoyed the first book, I think, in some ways more than I expected to. And the second book, The Warrior Prophet, was and still is one of my favorite books of the year, and I absolutely loved it. And then The Thousandfold Thought, while being my least favorite of the first three, I still thought had a lot of really good aspects, and also did a lot to kind of close up the arc. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is because everybody always says, and I get why, that you really shouldn't consider this, its own story. You need to read the next four, the Aspect Emperor, and the whole thing is the Second Apocalypse. And I absolutely get that. This doesn't so much end on a cliffhanger, but while certain things are wrapped up particularly well, and certain arcs are kind of completed or coming to a satisfying part, very obviously this is just setting up what is to come in the Aspect Emperor, those four books. And from everything I've heard too, that really is like ups it even more, like the highs are even higher. So I totally get that. I will say though, I absolutely I'm going to be reading that and hope to be starting to get to it soon. But I do think that the ending here you get in The Thousandfold Thought, I think, is satisfying, and I don't think this is something that you have to read the whole thing to get any sort of satisfaction out of, because we do see some things definitive, and it really is also the culmination of the events to an extent that we've gotten in the trilogy so far, and so that really made me feel like it kind of worked out. So I figured I'd mention that too. And I'll talk some general non-spoiler thoughts. I'm going to talk some spoiler thoughts too. I will very specifically mention when we're getting there about this, but this is an interesting series, and I did do a review for the first book and kind of a review spoiler discussion for the second book. I had a lot of thoughts there, and so if you want more details about the specific books, you can definitely check that out. But this series is quite different from a lot of other fantasy out there, and I think it's one of the things that makes it niche, but also just makes it so impressive to read. Because the first thing is Bakker is a phenomenal author. His prose, the way he writes with intention, his style and everything you have in it. It's as you're reading, there's so many beautiful passages, and there are the beautiful and the profane, I think, because you also get lots of very intentionally worded, phrased things that are less on the beautiful side, but it's also everything there. You really feel the intention behind it and what he's getting at, and a lot of different themes and ideas that he is exploring in here. It's also much more on the kind of like literary philosophy type of side, especially in the last book with the philosophy here. So you're not going to go in and get anything that's like your typical type of fantasy book, because while this is in a fantastical world, there are magic and different races and things like that that exist. It's definitely not anything like kind of like the typical modern fantasy. It's quite different, and so I think that's going to be the thing too. Is this is not going to work for everyone based on some of those reasons. But I think if you really appreciate writing and prose and theme and the exploration of ideas, there is just so much here. And again, this is only like part one, so to speak, because of the fact that the next four books are really kind of bringing everything together and ending the series for the entire thing. But I just have been very impressed with what Bakker has done and with how engaged I've been here, because this is also one of those series where the characters are all pretty terrible, and even the ones that you might feel kind of sympathetic for or feel like you're rooting for a little bit also are terrible and have a lot of flaws. And this isn't the series where you're really supposed to be necessarily rooting for the characters. We're much more so looking at, I think, the theme and ideas are the big thing here with what's being followed. Although we're exploring that through the characters and through the events, this trilogy at least is has quite a lot of parallels and is taking place around crusade or a holy war, and exploring the nature of that and the ideas around that. And throughout, kind of the central theme that is being explored is the death of reason and our venture in denialism, and that's made extremely clear in book three and with the complete of some of the completion of some of the arcs, but also is it's something you can see very early on too with the way things are progressing, which I'll talk a little bit more about when I get into some spoilers here. But it also is exploring, and I've heard a lot of people talk about it. Apparently, Bakker has mentioned in interviews as well that very specifically he is trying to target and get male readers reading this to internalize some of the ideas of toxic masculinity and how some of these things here, and as you're seeing it with these characters and how crappy a lot of that stuff is, for lack of a better term. And so you can definitely see things there, as well as just exploring the idea of blind faith versus logic and exploring the nature of war and of holy wars and religion, and things like that as we go along. And the kind of the core thing we're following along here with all of this is, like I said, the holy war and a character who finds himself at the center of that as we go along. So those are some general things I wanted to mention, and from here I'm going to talk some spoilers, just because I want to talk about some of the like big notes and things that, especially a lot of this is more so after finishing the last book, kind of new thoughts. Um, but so let's we'll jump in there, and I'll timestamp this. If you've not read, you can skip past here. But yeah, so talking about the death of reason, the blind faith versus logic, and those types of things. That's the big thing that, especially with the last book, and it makes it pretty clear. Is the big thing that kind of comes to the fore, and I think it's so well done because of so many of the things that have been brought up from the early books, and seeing what happens with some of our characters. The biggest, like, literal death of reason type of moment happens too is with Naor, who in the early books, and he's one of the Skilvendi, and he's from this like brutal savage people, and we find out about that. But he's also very specifically called out as being one of the only people who's like awake and sees what's happening in the world, and has the like this like a consciousness to see what's going around, and isn't just blindly following or doing this or that type of thing. And his arc, as he is just increasingly driven to the brink of madness until he's well past that brink, and his reason completely dies. Like, you're seeing that bigger picture thing happen with him throughout the trilogy, even though it's not always the direct focus. And so I thought that was just really well done. That character as well too. It's a, I mean, again, not a good person at all, but it's just seeing his descent into madness and the destruction, and it's you don't necessarily like feel with the character because he is so bad, but you can also, I think, pity, if nothing else, some of these characters, because they feel so real and so complex. And he's someone who is, his like driving thing is he wants revenge against MOINES, because of the relationship that they had, and it's him struggling with his own self-hatred around his sexuality because of that, and which is what makes him so just adamant about Serway being his proof. And that, as you kind of dig in there too, because it's something that becomes more opaque as you get along, just specifically why that proof is so important to him, in his relationship with Kellis. But you see, I think, a lot of the themes through that character, which I think was just really, really well done. But the big thing too is, this whole time we've been seeing the second apocalypse and the apocalypse in general as this massive war and this destruction, and as we're talking about the no god, and everything, and even the name the no god, and having the second apocalypse end up being something entirely different, where it is more so about reason dying, and Kellis just having everybody blindly follow and finding out, okay, he's going to be named the Aspect Emperor, and saying that history and time before is dead, and he's starting like a new world, and it's more of a philosophical apocalypse. despite I feel even saying this, like, despite such the heavy, you know, all of the philosophy in the third book, I still feel like that just was such a fantastic kind of capstone to go there and have that be what's actually happening. And it all of it works so well. This is the kind of book I think, especially, even though I'm going to read the next four before I do any sort of rereading, but this is definitely going to be a series with a lot of reread value, because even going back and thinking about a lot of this now, it's just there's so much more that you can see, these moments, these character arcs, and these things in the world that we're building, things not being exactly what you assume that they are, but that are there. And so already a lot of excitement there, I think. But um, the handling of that in general and the way that Bakker has handled theme throughout is just so impressive. It's also I mentioned a little bit about like the ideas about toxic masculinity and, you know, men and women, and the pretty terrible treatment of women in these books, which is, you know, a reflection of quite a lot of history, and you know, even today to some extent as well. But with that too, something I really have noticed is the way that Bakker so very often uses like sexual terms, or as a metaphor to describe different things. And it comes off occasionally as so vulgar in a way that is very intentional, because again, it's showing it. And sometimes it'll be like just describing landscape, describing this or that, but kind of just putting everything into those terms in a way that never feels overbearing, but it's just also, you really get the idea of how he's trying to bring this thing and show these things in there as well. And so that's something specific. And it's that intentionality with the way that he writes as well too. There are some passages that are just simply beautiful, and the kind of thing you read, you stop and you want to go back and read. But it's that intentionality with so many scenes, so many pieces, dialogue, words, very specific things, even if they don't always feel like they're going to be the most important, are all there for a reason. And that's just something that I find so amazing when an author can pull that off. And again, I know I don't even have half the story. And so that's where I'm very eagerly awaiting to see what Aspect Emperor has in store. I know that Aspect Emperor is supposed to get quite a lot darker in a lot of ways, which, based on the way that this ended, I can absolutely see that. But it's just, even though, I guess, like I said, I've commented, and, you know, until I actually read Aspect Emperor, I'm sure I can't fully comment, because I commented that in some ways wasn't as dark as I expected it to be, just based on what's being said. It's, I think I guess, depends on what you refer to as dark, and how you kind of define a lot of those things, because this does go to some very dark places, don't get me wrong, but it also, despite like having all of your characters that are just like down in the dirt and the mud, and like down here in the world, and you being there with them and having quite a lot of terrible things happening, it never feels like you're like reveling in it. And I feel like you get that sometimes with the sort of like grimdark novels, where it's more like, it's like, you know, you're you're trying to be as dark and twisted, or it's your torture porn, or it's your this or that. And for me, I feel like, partially because of the way that Baker is coming to this with his philosophy, and with the kind of the big thematic picture, there's a certain level of detachment, which I think, for me at least, and I'd be curious if other people felt this way, or if this was more so me, but there's a certain level of detachment that I think serves a purpose really well from some of those things, while also, I'm not even sure how I want to explain this, because I feel like with some of that stuff, it's, when I'm reading that, I see that as really the theme, those different things, but then also at the same time, you have the more close exploration of some of those things with the characters. And I think the way it ends up working is, you really feel some of the moments very closely, and you feel very like connected to what's happening in the story, and you're right down in there with the characters. But then you can kind of also, Baker will like take a step back and look at things more philosophically, and more in the big picture, and really like get his points across and explore some of those things without it feeling like it's just like, oh yeah, look how brutal I am. And at no point does it ever feel like that's what Baker is doing whatsoever. And I think that works as well too, because I've seen the stuff where it's like, it just feels like people are trying to be edgy, and at least for me, Baker never really came across that way, and is really coming across in a very, you know, intelligent way, in a very intentional way, which I certainly appreciate. And then with Kellis, who has a really steady arc, but with that's where a lot of the philosophy is coming in. Now, I will, as a side note, I still have not actually finished reading the glossary, which I have been told, and from the bits I've skimmed, it seems very the case is going to be very enlightening with a lot of this kind of stuff. And I'm also, as I mentioned, I'm not like hugely into all of the philosophy, so I'm not going to try and espouse any of that or like summarize any of those big types of things. There's a ton of that in here, obviously. But coming from the Dunyan and their idea of truth and reason and everything with that is really important here. But essentially, the Dunyan have been trying to move further and further away from any sort of passion and just go specifically follow this logic in this analysis of everything and going there and that's where it's everything's planned, and that's kind of why Kellis is able to see what's going to happen in some ways because he knows what came before and what's happening. And the his showdown with Moengus when we get there, and I love the bit that Moengus was trying to learn the magic of the Kisharim and he couldn't because it involved passion and he wasn't really capable of that. It was a good thing, but then Kellis taking all of this and turning it in and using it to create this movement of blind faith, and it's sort of the in some ways like the opposite of what's happening, but it with just that idea and some of the stuff with the Junye, but just taking all of this and it's that sort of look, like I said, with it because we see all of that. We're talked about how the people they follow the logos and reason and everything, and then he's using this to create this absolute dearth of reason. Was just a really interesting arc to explore. And I have to say too, again, it doesn't really wrap anything up in some ways, but Kamian's end here was just so satisfying. And he's been sort of a whirlwind of an arc too, because you see him, everybody else and himself sees him as just this weak man, but then you see that he actually has quite a lot of power, and some of it coming from Seswatha and everything to do with him being a Mande schoolman, but what he's able to do and him as a character, seeing that kind of exploration with him, but just the end, the culmination of those events where he's just renouncing everybody and walking off was just such a killer scene, and so it was one that I really really quite enjoyed as well. And like I said, I think there's so much you could probably analyze, and I'm sure many people have, and I know specifically some people who are super into the philosophy side of it, but there's so much that you can explore with all of that. And I'm sure I'm barely scratching the surface, so that's where I do plan to finish going through the glossary and kind of just reading through, getting some more of that background. This is definitely going to be something that I reread as well. I'm sure probably multiple times once I finish the next 4 books. But I just wanted to talk a bit about some of those things and how much I enjoyed what Bakker did with this series, even though it's one of those series that like whenever you say like enjoy, it's just like it's so different. And I talked a lot too about the exploration of the Crusade, and that fits in really well here as a setting because the Crusades in reality, similar to what's explored here, often didn't really have a whole lot of reason, or it just they were these brutal, ugly things with just senseless violence and ultimately pointless in so many ways. And so I think centering it around a very real thing, but then using, of course, the different religions and the clash there as well. I think it worked so well to work with his bigger picture and everything that's being done here as well. And yeah, I feel like I'm still, despite I've kind of let my thoughts shake around in my head a little bit and absorb everything. And I still, even then, it's just every time I talk about this, there's just so much to talk about. I feel like I end up getting a little scatterbrained. So this won't be the last time I'm talking about the series, but I kind of wanted to just get some of my general thoughts now that I finished it out there and talk about it a little bit, and partially just to talk and organize my thoughts as I speak, which is kind of what I end up doing sometimes when I film reviews and videos like this. So there you have it. Those are some things that I wanted to talk about. This is just a really a triumph and a very impressive trilogy, and knowing again that everybody says everything's upped in the next 4 books of the Aspect Emperor, I'm looking forward greatly to getting into them. I've been really taking my time with these books, which I think for me has worked really well, and they're not the kind of books that you want to rush just because, again, it's the way they're being written. There's a lot of detail, there's intentionality to what's being written. It doesn't feel like Bakker ever really writes something just to write it. It always serves some purpose. And so yeah, there's so much great stuff here. This is one, like I said, if you've been unsure on checking it out, I hopefully have helped make it seem if it's going to be something that's going to be you for not, because I know that this will not work for everybody, and this is going to be one of those series. This is always going to be a little bit niche, but I've seen quite a lot of people around booktube who have read and really appreciate it, and so I think it's one of those things that has more of a market than you might think, in some ways, just because it just needs the right kind of reader. So hopefully, if you end up checking out, you'll have the right expectations, kind of know what you're getting into, and yeah. Otherwise, if you're watching this and have read the whole thing, which is probably most people who are still watching at this point, um, definitely let me know your thoughts on any of the things I talked about, or a few other specific things. Like I said, there's just so much here to talk about, and and this is gonna be only a small part of it, but it's been quite the journey going through, and I'm looking forward to continue. And that's really it for this one. So make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description as always for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizard of the Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether these books, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun. We'd love to have you. And of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.